I'm going to go ahead and move to our presentation for today. And what I'd like to do first is introduce our moderator today, who is Heather Waldman. And if that name sounds familiar to you, that's because Heather is the meteorologist and the climate reporter for KCRA 3 here locally. And we are just delighted that she's agreed to help us out today. She's been a real advocate for making sure that the issues we have here in the region when it comes to weather and climate are always being covered. And so we're really happy to have her here. Heather joined KCRA 3 in 2021 after spending her entire life living and working on the East Coast. Heather was the evening meteorologist for NBC affiliate in Buffalo, New York, covering everything from lake effect, snow, to big windstorms and intense heat waves. Heather also piloted the station's climate coverage, becoming the first meteorologist in the market to share the important stories of how a warming world is affecting the region. She began her career at AccuWeather Network, where you may have heard her voice on radio places like Stockton, Modesto, and Truckee. She graduated from Pennsylvania State University, earning degrees in both meteorology and communications. And so, Heather, thank you so much for joining us today.
Ross, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join the Placer County Water Agency today and in talking about these really important issues. As Ross mentioned, I spent the vast majority of my life and my career focusing on East Coast weather, where it rains on average every 1 to 4 days or so. So moving to California was, of course, professionally a very big change. And I very quickly came to realize just how important it is not only to have a good grasp of what kind of weather may be coming with each winter, but more importantly, what that weather, what that rain, what that snow can translate to as far as it comes to water supply. So this is my second full winter here. Both winters, of course, very, very different, and both really illustrated the challenges that come with forecasting water supply and the importance of it too.
Great, thank you. And our first presentation today is going to be from Shane Motley. Shane is PCWA's Director of Energy Marketing. He also has 20 years experience as a trained meteorologist. So great to have two meteorologists here to talk about the weather and the snowpack. The second presentation after Shane will be Linda Higgins. She is our our Deputy Director of Customer Services. She's also our Principal Water Efficiency Specialist. She has worked in the region in that role for nearly 2 decades. So we're really excited to have Linda here too, and she'll join us later. But as for now, I'm going to go ahead and just lead it off and let Heather and Shane kind of get into a discussion. So welcome to this presentation.
All right, thanks, Ross. Hi, Shane. Shane and I are going to be talking about snow surveys, what they are, how they're done, and most importantly, what a snow survey can tell us about potential water supply. So as Ross alluded to, we're both meteorologists, so we may do a little bit of geeking out here over the next 10 minutes or so. So this will be fun. So Shane, for starters, for somebody that may not have heard of a snow survey, or maybe they've heard that phrase, but they couldn't really define it. What is a snow survey, and how does the Placer County Water Agency go about conducting that snow survey?
That's a good question, Heather, and it's great to be here. I'm happy to be here amongst another meteorologist. And between the two of us, we've had, I'm sure, a number of meteorology classes. And, the snow survey part of it helps us get a picture of what we're expecting on the forecasting side with the water supply. And one of my first weather forecasting classes, I'll never forget my professor kind of going around and asking the class, what is the first thing you need to look at when you're constructing a forecast? And the students, we've got access to all sorts of technology. We've got access to Doppler radar. So one student saying, well, maybe look at the radar. And another student saying, well, we've got satellites up there. Maybe take a look at the overall satellite picture and see if there's any storms coming in. And all these ideas started getting progressively more interesting because nobody was coming up with the right answer. And you could tell the professor was getting increasingly frustrated. And he walked over to the window and he said, all right, everybody, the first thing you need to do when constructing a forecast is this: look out the window. If you don't know what's going on right now, you're not going to have any sense on what's going to happen in the future. So first thing you do is you need to kind of construct your baseline and then take the forecast on from there. And the snow surveys play an integral part of that. It's kind of like our look out the window. So we're going to go ahead and look out the window right now. We actually have some very interesting video from our helicopter flight as we were going to our snow survey not more than a month ago. So just an impressive scene out there, an incredible scene, especially after last year where a similar scene was not as snow-capped as this, but a lot of snow out there. We've had some record-breaking snow, and we had to send folks out there to look at that snow and see how much water is contained within the snowpack. So this is kind of our look out the window, as my professor was saying, so you can get a sense of what you're dealing with. So as we go through the summer months, we can forecast and manage around how much water is contained within that snowpack. And you see these folks out there carrying that tube around. That is the instrument that we use to sample how much water is in the snow. So they take that snow tube, shove it down into the snowpack, and weigh it. And with a little bit of math, you can find out the quantity of water that is contained within that snow. And of course, that gives us an idea. If you have a snowpack, say, of 100 inches, and you melted that snow down, maybe 10 to 12 inches of that snowpack would be water. And then you can forecast how much of that is going to eventually make it into the reservoir. So again, a much nicer look this year than what we were looking at last year. And Heather, you mentioned you've been here for 2 years, and in those 2 years, you've seen a number of extremes here. We had the hottest summer on record back in 2021, and last year was in the top 3 summers. And then this winter, we've seen record-breaking snowpack. So it's going from one end of the extreme to the next. And of course, forecasting that comes with a lot of difficulty, because when you're going into the winter, you don't really know what you're going to get. If you're on the extreme side, you could be on the dry side or the wet side. So that's why we go out and do these snow surveys, to find out what we're dealing with as we head into the drier summer months.
Yeah, of course, these snow survey sites, we refer to them as snow courses. So how many does the Placer County Water Agency use? And is it the same spot every survey, or are we varying our location? And what's the significance of choosing one method or another?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we have 4 in total, and we go out and measure at the same 4 locations every year. And the reason why we want to get those same 4 locations is because you, of course, want to construct an average over time and see if this year might be a little bit more of an outlier compared to a previous year. And with that, you can put that information into a computer model, and you can say, well, hey, last year there might have been a couple of inches of water within the snowpack. That translated to X amount of acre feet of water into our reservoirs. Well, this year we've got maybe 5 or 10 times as much. So maybe that should lead to a higher quantity of runoff into the area reservoir. So again, we go out there and we take numerous samples at the same site. So we've got those 4 courses, but at one course, we might take about 8 samples through in that course, because if you just drilled down and did one sample in one location, it might not be fully representative of the entire area, because you could have some wind that causes some snow to drift. It might pile up in one location, and you don't want that single measurement to dictate the entire course. So they go through about 10 different spots, average that out, and that gives you your final quantity of the water contained within that snowpack.
All right, so we've talked about how we go about gathering the data, and now this is kind of the big reveal. We all know it's been a great rain and snow season for all of Northern California. So what's the result of this year's snow survey for the Placer County Water Agency?
Yeah, I got to show you this video before we get into the full results, because this is incredible. This is a video of our snow survey back in 2022, last year, with their snow tube. And so let's go to that video now. I think that's our slide 11 there. And what you're going to see is the snow survey team going out with the snow survey gear. And the tube is, I don't know, maybe about 8-10 feet long. So there he is. And you can see as they push this snow tube into the ground, they're seeing kind of the depth of the snow, and then they're going to weigh that and see how much water is contained. Now, this is the same location this year. You can see that tube much, much larger, going much deeper. And watch as they pull this out. I mean, I say, for the Mary Poppins fans out there, that's like Mary Poppins pulling the lamp out of her handbag there. And it's just incredible. It just keeps on getting longer and longer and longer. And you measure that snow, and that gets to our results. So we're going to watch that one more time, just because I think this is so impressive. It was a really cool video that one of my colleagues here put together, and same spot, one year versus the other. And it's really great seeing this and having a snowpack to deal with as opposed to the last couple of years where we've been dealing with a much lesser snowpack. So as far as the results, well, the results show in the next image that we have here that we are doing much better with respect to normal. And that's the story across the entire Sierra, which is great. We've been fairly fortunate here in our basin where we've gotten a little bit more precipitation than some of the other basins in the past year. But this year, the entire Sierra is doing very well. But for our basin specific, let's go ahead and show the results there. So you saw that snow tube coming out of the ground. How much was it measuring? Well, over 100 inches of snow. And then that depth corresponds to the amount of water contained within that snow, and it's quite a bit. So you can see the 4-course average. If we average out all those courses together, there we are, 203% of normal. So a great year for snowfall, a very interesting year given that we are in this La Nina pattern, yet it's translating to very, very impressive snow depths. We actually had, I think Palisades reported 710 inches of snow accumulated over the course of the year. That's not the depth, but that's just the accumulation over the season. And that beat out the previous record back in 2017, which is around, I believe, 206 inches. So just narrowly beating that out, but still a record-breaking snow season for some locations out there. So we'll take it.
Yeah, those numbers are absolutely incredible. And of course, the 4 that you see there, those represent higher elevation locations where we would expect those big numbers to be. But for anybody that's joining us from one of our lower elevation foothills communities, they've had a fair share of snow this year too, especially back in January. We had these big low snow events coming through and really causing some issues at times. But is there a way to track the water coming in from that low snow? Or are there other technologies other than these manual snow surveys that allow us to look for that water? Because of course, yeah, it melts off first, but it does have an impact when it comes to flood control and water supply too.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful question. It kind of goes back to that story I was telling about with my professor earlier in our broadcast here. And, you've got this technology that's seemingly fairly simple. You stick a tube in the ground, you measure the snow, you find out how much water is there, right? And you do that at a few locations. But there's some new technology that we're tapping into first this year for our basin, where you can take an aircraft, put a LiDAR on there, and it can measure the depth of the snow across the entire region from low elevations to higher elevations. And here's an image of that plane there. And the location of the LiDAR is on the belly of the aircraft. And that LiDAR shoots the laser beam down, it bounces off the snow, and they can calculate with a very high degree of precision the depth of the snow in 3-meter boxes. So very, very, very high resolution. It also measures something else that's fairly interesting. It measures something that we call the albedo. It's kind of a fancy word for the reflectivity of the snow, how white the snow is. If it's very high albedo, a very white snow, it's going to reflect the sunlight back into the atmosphere instead of absorbing the sunlight. What does that mean? It just means it's not going to melt as easily. If you had darker snow, dirtier snow, that melts much quicker. And having that information allows us to know how quickly that snow will melt as we get into the summer season. Of course, right now it's fairly cool, but in the next couple of days, it's going to be getting warmer, and we can kind of calculate how to manage around that as that snow starts to melt. But back to your question, Heather, you mentioned, how do you measure that lower elevation snow? This is one of those tools. And what I would like to show next is we have kind of an aerial view with this data overlaid on top of it. And actually, let's go ahead and show this. Let's go ahead and show what the flight path is for the aircraft as it goes, leaving from Reno. And this airplane kind of does this zigzag pattern across the Sierra. And as it's doing that, it's sampling, it's sending those pulses of the radar beam down, gathering that data, and that allows it to see the depths across this region that it's crisscrossing. So once it takes that data, they go back and process it, and then you can get an image that looks like the next image that we're going to show here, which is the Sierra Basin with that data overlaid on top of it. So there's a lot of information on here. I'm going to break this down a little bit. The colors that you see, the little dots, those are two things. Those are our snow survey locations. So where the folks go out, put that tube into the ground. Those are the yellow dots. The purple dots there are indicating where they have these automated sensors. Those are called snow pillows. And what those do is it's essentially a scale out in remote locations that can send back the information about how much that snow weighs on that scale. And that can tell us things about the snow water content, the amount of water contained within the snow. Those don't need somebody to go out there and monitor every day. Those just automatically send the data back. And then the next color you see on here is kind of overlaid on top of the Sierra. That is the high resolution data from the automated snow observatory team that we can put onto this map. The red colors indicate deeper snowpack, where the blue colors indicate a little bit less deep snowpack. So let's go ahead and fly on in. We're going to fly on in. This is kind of a cool animation here showing as we come into our basin. And again, the deeper snow on the higher elevations, that's to be expected. But Heather, back to your original point, we have some lower elevation snow. You don't see any dots in those locations, right? But you do see from the information from the automated snow observatory team, you see there is snow there. And with this new tool, we can get a sense of the entire snowpack over the entire region instead of just one location. So the natural question for some people is, well, if you've got this new technology that gives you the snow depth, why do you need to go out and sample the snow in person? And the reason is, this is just the snow depth in that reflectivity component that I mentioned. It doesn't tell you exactly how much water is contained within the snow. But with this, coupled with the snow tubes, those folks that go out there and measure the water in the snow, you can get a much better sense of the snow water content across the entire region. So you kind of need everybody and all the data combined to paint a complete picture on how much water is in that snow, and of course, how much water will eventually make its way into the reservoirs.
And of course, getting data at those higher elevation spots, always a challenge just because it's simply hard to get there on foot. All right, we have time for one quick question. This one comes from somebody listening in, Sean in Roseville, talking about how temperatures vary season to season, day to day in our area in general. But do we have a sense for when peak runoff may start to occur from this giant snowpack? And do we know when we would expect the biggest impacts on the upper American River?
Yeah, and of course, I want to point this out. You know, we are expecting some very high flows this summer, very cold flows. So for everybody out there, please be careful when you're on the area rivers. It's going to be flowing very fast and very, very cold. Now, as far as when the peak occurs, we're expecting the peak to occur within the month of May and June. Those peaks will be increasing quite substantially. Of course, it's been very cold. We've had one of the coldest Marches on record here in Placer County. And so that snowpack is still quite high for this time of year. And if we quickly flip to these warmer temperatures, like we're going to actually see this weekend and then into next week, I know, Heather, you've been watching that very closely, it's going to melt fairly quick as well. So I will say this, the snowpack is primed and ready to melt. And as soon as it starts melting, which it will next week, we're going to see those rivers start to increase faster and faster over time.
Yeah, so this is definitely that point in the season where if you frequently visit some of those waterways, maybe you live near them, you just want to keep a close eye on things, likely for the next couple of months here.
Absolutely.
All right, Shane, thanks so much. That was a lot of fun. Now we have all this information about the snow surveys. We know how productive the snow season was in the Sierra, but the big question now is, well, what does that mean for people in Northern California? What does that mean for the drought? What does that mean for our water supply? And how does that affect you as customers of the Placer County Water Agency? So to help answer some of those questions, we're going to bring on Linda Higgins. And again, Linda is the Placer County Water Agency's Deputy Director of Customer Services. So Linda, I as a meteorologist, and I'm sure you as part of a water agency, you hear this question a lot. You get a lot of rain, you get a lot of snow. The first thing people want to know is, are we out of the drought or not? And one of the indicators there was an adjustment to Governor Newsom's executive order on the drought a couple of months ago. So talk a little bit about what the update to that executive order says, and then what it means for the people in Placer County.
Sure, yes. Thank you, Heather, and thanks for teeing it up so well for us. And obviously, thanks for being here with us. So the governor's latest executive order, and there have been several executive orders, but the one on March 24th said that some regions have had near record amounts of snow and rain, which has helped rehabilitate the surface water supplies for some, not all, parts of the state. And importantly for us, it ended the 20% conservation target that we've had. What it means to PCWA customers is we're no longer implementing stage 2 of our water shortage contingency plan. And we're asking customers to use water wisely.
So use water wisely. What does that mean? Because I'm sure it's like payday, right? We've got all of this surplus surface water. Everybody can see it. I guess the instinct would be, well, we're good. Let's use our water as much as we can. So why the idea of using water efficiently and moving
Right.
forward with the idea of conservation?
Right. Yes. I think I have friends asking, when we're watching a Kings game, they're like, "Hey, well, so what's the situation with the water? You should know. Why do we have to be efficient? We've got all this rain." So I think everyone's asking. And I think if I put my professional hat on, I would say climate change, is making the swings between drought and floods more extreme. So, to preserve the improved surface water supplies that we just got, we all have to do our part to be responsible to use water efficiently. And as a mom, telling my fourth grader, we got a lot of rain, we got a lot of snow, you can see it on the mountains, but we still only should use just the water that we need and not be wasteful. And also when we're watering, efficiently, it grows healthier plants. Plants, when they get the right amount of water that they need versus over or under watering, they're much healthier.
Yeah, of course, a lot of our conversation so far today has been focused on surface water. So what comes off the snowpack, what goes into rivers and creeks and eventually our reservoirs. And that is a significant part of our water supply, but relying less on that surface water will allow more of that important groundwater bank to start to build back up as well. So that's what we sort of view as long-term security as meteorologists and you as water managers as well. But talk about some of the ways that people can be more efficient with their water use, and talk about some of the ways that Placer County Water Agency can help customers do that.
Absolutely. I think we have a slide for that. I can start off with that. So in our region, and so you've been here 2 years, so hopefully you're noticing that, in our region here, it gets hot. And so most of the water use that we have daily goes on our lawns and our landscapings. And you can see here, if you skip a shower, it saves 18 gallons. If your lawn skips a shower, it saves 80 gallons of water. So most of the water that we use is on our lawns and landscapings. About 30% of that is lost due to overwatering and evaporation. So even though there are many ways to save water, outdoors is where we can make the biggest bang for our buck, or it makes the hugest difference. And then I think I've got another one. And the other one I think that we've noticed during the last drought, a lot of people were great. They just shut off all of their water. But we also saw, not even in urban landscapes, but just out and about too, is that we lost a lot of trees. And so trees have been suffering over the past few years. So we're trying to make a big attempt to let people know to water their trees effectively. And we have a link in the chat there. So if you type in tree care PCWA, we have a great tip sheet on our website about trees. The other thing I want to mention is we need to check for leaks. Leaks account for about 30% of all the water used in a home. Also checking the soil before you water. We didn't put a slide. You can see then the little froggy moisture meter. We have these for our customers too. If you use these to check the soil before you water, because sometimes, especially right now, it seems like a normal time for people to start watering, but actually most of the soil is saturated, very much saturated. And then the other thing that I want to mention is even replacing some lawn with low water use plants and efficient irrigation are long-term investments in landscape and water efficiency. And we are here to help. And we've got a slide about all of our rebate programs. And we actually have a brand new rebate program to help customers actually look for leaks inside and outside their home. It's up to $500 to repair leaks. We have other rebates for taking out your lawn, replacing it with low water use plants, efficient irrigation, a smart controller, pool covers, and we have some for toilets and washers too. Lots of rebates. And then I want to end, because I know we want to get to the Q&A, but I want to end on my favorite one is we've been doing this, I think, for 8 years now. We have one day where we offer mulch. We call it Mulch Mayhem to our customers. And it's an easy one that we can do. And this is my favorite saying: mulch is like adding icing on a cake, right? It keeps it moist and it keeps it from evaporating. So and our Mulch Mayhem event customers can come and get 1 yard for free. And we're going to have a do-it-yourself pile, so customers can come get some mulch. May 6th, 8 to noon at Sierra College. And those are my tips.
Awesome, Linda, thank you so much for sharing all that. Hopefully some people will be able to take advantage of some of those programs and help not only be a little more conservative with water this year, but it sounds like those are some great long-term plans as well. So now we want to get into sort of the general question and answer session. And I know there have been a couple notes in the chat. If you have a question for either Linda or Shane or even myself to answer about water in Placer County, go ahead and submit it into the chat. I'll kick it off with a question. Shane, we'll bring you back into the fold here. So we talk about climate change and about, observing snowpack year after year after year here in Northern California, and how climate change is making these droughts potentially longer. It's making our wet season potentially wetter. So what have we seen in the data, just with Placer County's data, about just how climate change has been impacting potential water supply in the area?
Yeah, one of the things we've definitely seen is the temperatures are increasing over time. And like I've said, in the summer months, we had back-to-back record-breaking years. So in 2020, the year before you moved here, Heather, that was the hottest summer on record. Then you got here, and it's the hottest summer on record again. And then last year, it was in the top 3. So we've had 3 back-to-back. But that's the summer, right? I mean, we know it's going to be hot in the summer. That's more of a energy usage type of thing. And we do have our hydropower facilities here that try to help within the grid to help bring the pressure down on the electric grid. But as far as the water supply goes in the winter months, we've also seen warmer than normal temperatures. And a lot of those temperatures, the warming is coming with the overnight temperatures or the low temperatures, meaning that if you did have snowpack on the ground, it's melting a little bit faster than it did in previous years. Not only that, but you are having snow levels starting to creep up a little bit more, especially for the lower elevations, right? If you have an observation station at 8,000 feet that's been reporting snow levels and snow totals since, the early, like 1910, 1920, you're not going to see too much of a difference there. It's that like 5,000 foot area where it's starting to track downwards. And it's not necessarily a trend we like to see, because like a year like this year, that snowpack kind of acts like our battery. It's another reservoir. And as it slowly moves into the system, we can manage around it. If it comes down all at once in the winter, it becomes a much more difficult issue to deal with if it comes all at once. So again, we would prefer if the snowpack is a year like this, but when you have a snowpack that is fairly excessive like this year, and it's early in the season, then you also have to wonder, are we going to get a warm, wet storm that could potentially melt that very quickly? So again, it is making it more of a challenge for sure. You've probably heard this term, the weather whiplash. That's more of a seasonal basis, where one year it's very hot, the next year it's very cold or very wet or very dry. But we've also seen the kind of sub-seasonal weather whiplash, where 1 month it's very dry and 1 month it's very wet. And the thing, as you know, here in California, the year-to-year variability in our precipitation is higher than anywhere else in the country. So what that means is, normally in the Sierras, you might get 50 inches of rain in a season, but that could be plus or minus 20 inches. Whereas Houston, Texas also gets 50 inches of rain in a season, but it's plus or minus 5 inches from one year to the next. So again, it's difficult to manage around, but the climate change aspect is making things even more difficult and even tougher to manage.
Yeah, now we have a somewhat related question. This is coming from Karen in Auburn. Of course, as we transition from sort of the early spring months into the later spring months, we're getting into these warmer patterns, the snow is melting, attention starts to shift, especially for the foothills, into fire season. So is there any indication for how this large snowpack may play into fire season this year?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and quite frankly, a difficult one to answer. So the short answer is this: as we have the snowpack with the vegetation allowing it to absorb more moisture, that certainly kind of abates the fire risk early in the season. As we get later into the season, though, you're going to have more dry brush at the lower kind of in the lower canopy at the ground, and that can present a higher risk for fire starts. So it's kind of a little bit of a balance. All in all, the risk for widespread fires, and these are coming from the folks that actually do forecast this aspect, it is lower than it was last year at this time, primarily because the vegetation is a lot greener. It has a lot more moisture to work with. So we'll take that. That's a plus.
Okay, now we have a question from Andy. Linda, this may be a question for you. He wants to know if there's any way for a homeowner to do what he calls a water audit. He says when he looks at his bill and he sees the gallons per day, he's shocked, even with the irrigation system off. So he's wondering how we can possibly use that much water and if there are any sneak leaks.
Yes, well, I'm glad he has the irrigation off right now too. So that's a good start. But yeah, we actually have a service that we offer. We have several trained water efficiency specialists here on our staff. So we could actually send someone out to look at the bill. We can look at several years of past water use and then come out there. We can work with the homeowner. They don't necessarily have to be home, but it's great if they are. We'll check their water meter to see if there's any leaks or sneaking or water usage if the water is off in their home. And then we can walk through to kind of pinpoint where that water, potentially where that water use is going based on the gallons per minute. So we can actually bring out some information, especially if the gallon seems very high, but also looking at past water bills from the last several years at the same time this year will kind of give us an indication if that's typical water use for this customer or not. So thanks for the question, Andy.
Yeah, and I think we have a follow-up from, I'm assuming this is a different listener, but you mentioned that the water meters in a lot of service areas are very sophisticated and can be accessed remotely. So is any real-time data available to Placer County Water Agency's customers that could be used to sort of track conservation and water use in their home?
Well, that's another good question. PCWA, we've been, I guess, not piloting anymore. We have what's called smart meters, where we do have some, hourly water usage, and we actually have, we've been actually testing the app out too here internally, but it's not we don't have those for all of our customers. We have them basically up in what we call our zone 3, the Colfax area. So it depends on where that customer lives, but we are starting to roll that out a little bit more. And we're actually very excited about it. It's called AMI. But I guess in layman's terms, it's a smart meter. So we're working on it. We definitely want to provide that information to customers. It's not exactly real time, but it's 24 hours, which is much better than getting your bill 30 days later.
Okay, so this next question is this will be for Shane and I. This is coming from Barry in Loomis. He understands that we may be expecting an El Nino, and it is true that NOAA forecasters are starting to key into the idea that an El Nino pattern may develop later this summer and stretch into the winter. So he's asking, of course, the all-important question: what could that mean for next winter? So Shane, I'll throw the hot potato to you first.
Not going to pit us against one another, is it?
No.
No, well, yeah, I mean, in general, I think after the 97, 98 El Nino, everybody here in California remembers what that did to our water supply. It was a lot of heavy rain out here. And so that's kind of the idea, right? That everybody kind of corresponds. El Nino means wet. Well, this year we had a La Nina and it was extremely wet. So as far as what's going to happen as we go into the winter months, I hate to say we'll wait and see, but at least the El Nino does put a kind of thumb on the scales towards a slightly wetter winter for places in Northern California. Now, as you go further south down into Southern California, it tips the scales even further in terms of a wet winter. So it's a little bit of a bonus, but it's not it's not a slam dunk by any means. But I'm interested to hear what your take is too.
Yeah, and of course, I focus on the next 7 days as a broadcast meteorologist, and we'll dabble a little bit into some long-term forecasting. But I mean, any meteorologist will tell you that there are so many factors that go into making a seasonal forecast, especially when you're talking about a season that's so far 8 months away at this point. It's interesting. I'm actually going to do a little bit with El Nino in our newscast later today. So I was looking at some information before we started this little webinar session, and you mentioned sort of the thumbprint of an El Nino for us here on the West Coast. If you look at what NOAA has put together, it sort of highlights this area of wetter than average conditions, pretty much from Southern California on southward into parts of South Texas, Southern Arizona, Southern New Mexico. But then you look at the Pacific Northwest, which doesn't include Northern California at all. They have an area highlighted that's typically warmer than average during a winter season. And right smack in the middle is us here in Northern California, which to me indicates that uncertainty that you were talking about, where El Nino is just kind of one factor in making these winter predictions. So yeah, again, as forecasters, as people who are trying to answer to the public, we hate to say, well, we'll wait and see, but yeah, we know that El Nino is a factor, but it's still a very uncertain factor. So it'll be worth paying attention to here over the next couple of months, for sure.
It'd be great if we could answer, yeah, a direct thing of El Nino equals what, but like you're saying, yeah, it's kind of still a coin toss at this point, but hopefully we're looking at a slightly better year, like some of the long-term forecasters are showing.
Yeah, okay. So now we'll take a question from Paul. When you express snowpack and snow water equivalent as a % of normal, are you comparing to a historical average or a historical median, meaning 50-50? So what are the pros and cons of using a mean versus a median? I feel like we're getting back to our college statistics classes here a little bit.
Oh boy, bad flashbacks there. No, essentially, you know, like I said, we have a lot of variability here in California. So it's one of the places for precipitation where we are more extreme from one year to the next than anywhere else in the nation. So given that normal, I guess you could say there isn't really any normal here, or there's not really any average. A normal year is not normal, so to speak. So because those ranges are so low, so large, what we want to do is focus on what would, if you had 100 years, what would that, you know, kind of line them all up and beat them all up, what would that 50th year be with terms of the wettest versus the driest year? And that's why we sometimes use the median. But again, this goes back to your original question, Heather. Why do we go in and measure the same spot year after year? It's because those statistics do play into our forecasts as we're trying to figure out how much water is eventually going to make it into those rivers and streams, and then eventually into the reservoirs so we can manage that water.
Okay, so Maria is asking a question from Rockland. She says that she's noticing a lot of new development in that area. So are developers and new homeowners, are they required to make these sort of low water landscapes with these new properties, or are they coming in with lawns? Are there rules set for those new construction areas?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so any new landscape now is required, and it's actually, there's a state ordinance, and it's called the California Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance. So when we, you know, in the industry, we call it WELO. So, you know, we have everyone has an acronym. And so, but yes, it does require that developers, when they build homes, that the landscape has a mix. So, and so that mix of low water use, it also has like a certain percentage. It also has a different type of irrigation that's required, but it's only in the front yards, so not in the backyards. And those are, you know, those are required by the land use authorities. So the answer, so it's kind of yes and no. It's required by developers, not necessarily by homeowners.
Okay, so we have one more question before we wrap things up. This question comes from Ken. He says, speaking of conserving water, what is being done to save or store the fresh water that's going to run off, aka the snow melt, through the delta and into the ocean? So it's that question that we hear frequently of, well, we have so much going out into the ocean, can any of that be held onto and stored?
I can unmute myself. Yeah, so that's the goal, right? The goal is to maximize the water that we have coming into the reservoirs. And we have to plan around that. So this gets into meeting our water supplies, our recreational folks, the folks that want to go out there and fish and raft. And of course, the things that live in the water, right? The ecosystem, we want to make sure we maintain that. And then our hydropower. So as we get into the summer months, we can have plenty of hydropower to supply to the energy grid when they need it the most. So there's a lot of requirements that we need to kind of take into consideration when planning for this water as it's coming in, and make the best use out of that, because like we said a second ago, Heather, we don't really know what's going to happen next year. We can make these assumptions that maybe in El Nino, maybe we'll have more water, but we have to be very careful with how we manage that. So again, we don't just maximize it for this year, but for next year as well. So there's a lot of careful balance that we're doing, not just with our reservoirs, but with all the reservoirs across California that try to plan for this, maximize it to the best use possible, and make the best that we can out of a very good situation that we are currently in, and kind of hoping for the best next year as well.
All right, Shane, Linda, thank you so much for participating today. I know I learned a lot about water management in Placer County, and hopefully our listeners did too. Ross, I believe the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much for a great conversation, great discussion. And once again, Heather, thank you so much for taking time to kind of walk us through this. Certainly, I think it added a certain element to the presentation, which made it a lot better. So we are at about time now. We're going to wrap it up in the final minute here. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Like I said earlier, if you have a question that we did not have time to answer today, please email it to info@pcwa.net. We will make sure that we respond accordingly. And I want to thank you again for joining us today. We will, as we sign off here, it is kind of a hard cutoff, so just kind of expect that once the webinar is over, you will just be disconnected. As I said earlier too, also will be recorded and put on our website early next week. So if you want to share it with anybody or rewatch it, please visit us at pcwa.net. So with that, I want to thank you again for joining us. And until next time, have a great day.